What I'm trying to learn about is how the US and China can escape Thucydides' trap. So that's something I've been trying to learn about for the past year, and watching these tectonic changes, just as were referred to. But I'm hoping over the next 2 days, we'll hear some more ideas. So to put it in the terms of the theme of the conference, Asia's responsibilities in this new era, the question is, how can we, Americans, Chinese, other Asians, think about ways in which the two most powerful states in the world, in an era in which their relationship will increasingly be stressful and even dangerous, how can they nonetheless relate to each other to sustain an international order that has been the foundation for the past 7 decades, on the basis of which one's seen or enabled all of the Asian miracles that we all look and are so thrilled by. So again, how specifically can American government, American thought leaders, Chinese government, Chinese thought leaders, other Asian participants, how operationally can we escape Thucydides' trap? And I'm hoping not just today to stir that pot a little bit, but to hear some thoughts from other people, and to actually over the next couple of days to hear more. I'm familiar with the contributions of the Fudan School or the Shanghai group to Chinese conceptualization of China's role in the international order, including work of Wan Huning and my old friend from 1980. He showed up to Harvard as a student and fellow, Ni Shishong or Wu Xinbo. So this community has been making contributions. I think we want to hear more. I read what you say, what you write, but I think this is an opportunity for all of us to join in to stimulate our imaginations. So that's basically my bottom line for being here. What I'm going to do in my presentation, as was asked, is give you just an introduction to this book in the hope that it will encourage you to come to grips with the argument in the book, and in a way that will help stimulate you to think more about how, in this changing era, the US and China can escape Thucydides' trap. So basically, I'm going to do 3 things. First, I'm going to introduce you, or I think for many of you, reintroduce you to a great thinker. Second, I'm going to present a big idea. And third, I'm going to pose a most consequential question. So let me start, since we're here in China, with President Xi Jinping and the statement that he made at Davos in January of 2017. So as he says, major powers should respect each other's core interests. And then here's the phrase I want to stop on for a second, and build a new model of relations, or what's sometimes called a new form or new type of great power relations, featuring non-conflict, non-confrontation, mutual respect, and win-win cooperation. As long as we maintain communication and treat each other with sincerity, Thucydides' trap can be avoided. So I like that statement very much. I like the idea of a new form of great power relations. I like the extension of that to what's now been a conversation about a new mode of international relations. And I'm very interested to understand more how this has now evolved to the term that Xi Jinping uses, the community with a shared future for mankind. But all of these, I believe, are forms of attempting to conceptualize the question, how can we escape Thucydides' trap? Indeed, as one of the people who works directly for Xi Jinping told me in a conversation in Beijing in December, he said, "Graham, why do you think Xi Jinping keeps talking about a new form of great power relations?" And he said, it's because we understand the old form is the form of relations that got countries before us into Thucydides' trap, ending in catastrophic conflicts. So we've got to invent a new form. And I say, good. I believe that's a good banner. Now what we need is some imagination about the content, or about how to operationalize this. So first, who's the great thinker I want to introduce you to? I understand we're here in China, but it is not Xi Jinping, even though I think he's a serious thinker too. It's a fellow named Thucydides. Now, for those of you here who are scholars, you'll be familiar with Thucydides. For the students, you may not be. So let me make sure you know how to pronounce his name, which our chairman pronounced very carefully. So this fellow's name is Thucydides. Well, let's see if we can do in unison. 1, 2, 3. Thucydides. One more time. Thucydides. Okay. So if nothing else, you can go back and tell your classmate, I met today a great thinker, and his name is Thucydides. So Thucydides was roughly a contemporary of Confucius. Confucius died just a few years before Thucydides was born in Greece. But Thucydides was the father and founder of history. Let me say it again. Thucydides founded history as a discipline. He wrote a book, a famous book, called The History of the Peloponnesian War, about the conflict between the two great city-states in classical Greece that caused the collapse of that civilization. So Thucydides wrote this book, which you can actually go to your Kindle or to your equivalent and download for free. And I would suggest to all of you students and everybody else, but especially students, go download, to start with, just book 1 of the history of the Peloponnesian War. It's only 100 pages long. And read it. And if every other page doesn't knock your socks off, check your pulse. So this is a serious thinker who has a big idea in almost every page. In my book, actually, for every chapter, I have an epigraph that comes from Thucydides, just to remind you how many interesting and important ideas he had. So here's a serious thinker, the founder and father of history, Thucydides. So what's the big idea? The big idea is Thucydides' trap. This is a term I coined back in 2010 or 11 when I started this study to make vivid an insight that was given to us by Thucydides. That's why it's called Thucydides' trap. So this was his idea. Thucydides' trap is the dangerous dynamic that occurs when a rising power threatens to displace a ruling power. Thucydides wrote about this in classical Greece 2,500 years ago and said famously, this is probably the single most quoted line in Western international relations studies. He wrote, quote, it was the rise of Athens and the fear that instilled in Sparta that made the war inevitable. Actually, by inevitable, he only means very likely. Not 100%, but very likely. So Sparta had been the dominant state in Greece for 100 years. Athens was exploding in the period after the defeat of the Persians at the beginning of the 5th century BC, inventing everything. They're inventing drama, so Sophocles, Aristophanes. They're inventing history, Thucydides. They're inventing philosophy, Socrates and Plato. They're inventing architecture. Look at the Parthenon. Can you find a finer building than that anywhere in the world today? They're inventing democracy, Pericles. So all these things are happening, and the Spartans, as they look at this, are thinking, wait a minute, these people are going to upset the order that's existed in Greece for 100 years, in which we're at the top of the pyramid, and everybody else takes his place beneath us. Think back to 100 years ago, or 100 and a few, and the rise of Germany and its impact on Britain. So I have a good chapter in the book on the road to 1914. Britain has been accustomed to being the dominant power in the world for 100 years. This was the empire on which it was said the sun never set. So this little island, nonetheless, had an empire that included India and Canada and South Africa, and Britain ruled the waves. That was the order. That had been a good order for 100 years. But Germany, as it rose after it unified, and especially after it industrialized, by 1900 had overtaken Britain in terms of GDP. And by 1914 was a quarter larger and was building a navy. So again, in Thucydidean terms, you could say the rise of Germany and the fear that this incited in Britain was a major structural cause of what became the most catastrophic war until that point, what we know historically as World War I. And again, I would say, especially for Chinese, you cannot study World War I too much. If you haven't read about it and thought about it, you're missing a very important lesson of history. In that case, Germany did not conclude, we're bigger, we're stronger, a war with Britain would be a good idea. No, nobody in Germany wanted a war with Britain. And Britain did not conclude, wait a minute, Germany's getting so big, we need a war with Germany. No, they believed they didn't need a war with Germany. They were trying to avoid a war with Germany. But what happened? What happened was an accident, or an external provocation. An archduke was assassinated in Sarajevo. One thing led to the other. The Austro-Hungarians felt they obliged to punish the Serbs. The Russians were afraid that the Austrians would overdo it. The Germans were backing the Austrians. The French were allied with the Russians. The British had become entangled with the French. And before the end, they were all in a war. A war in which everyone lost. If you jump to 1918 when the war is over, and if you had given any one of the leaders a chance for a do-over, no one of them would have chosen what he chose. But they did, and the war happened. So this is a sterling lesson for all of us. Today, the Thucydidean dynamic is illustrated by the rise of China, which has, over the past generation, risen further and faster and on more dimensions than any nation ever in history. And the impact that's had on the US, and the impact that you can particularly see in Washington today, as people are awaking to discover, as if it had been hiding somewhere, but mainly because they hadn't been looking, a huge China that is rivaling and indeed surpassing the US in many dimensions. So in the book, I look at the last 500 years of history. I find 16 cases, 1-6, in which a rising power threatens to displace a ruling power, 12 of the cases end in war, 4 of the cases in not war. So to say that war between the US and China is inevitable would be wrong on the record, but to say that the odds are bad for us, that the odds are against us, would be correct. So Thucydides' trap, and finally, the question, can the US and China escape Thucydides' trap? Here again, another line from the 19th Party Congress and Xi Jinping. We're talking further about this topic. He says, thought on socialism with Chinese characteristics for the new era makes the following thing clear. Major country diplomacy with Chinese characteristics aims to foster a new type of international relations, a new type of great power relations, new type of international relations, and to build a community with a shared future for mankind. So to the consequential question, which is the subtitle of my book. Can America and China escape Thucydides' trap? In the book, I offer a very professorial no and yes. So, no, if the US and China settle for business as usual, for diplomacy as usual, for statecraft as usual, then we should expect history as usual. And history as usual in this case could be a war, a catastrophic war, that would crash all our hopes and dreams, and all the hopes and dreams of everyone else in Asia, and would be judged afterwards to be dumb, stupid, insane, as crazy as World War I was, maybe even more so. So no, we cannot escape Thucydides' trap if we settle for business as usual. But on the other hand, yes, as Santayanta taught us, only those who refuse to study history are condemned to repeat it. So there's no obligation for Xi Jinping or Donald Trump or their successors to make the same mistakes the Kaiser made, or that Pericles made, or that others made in the other cases. So the objective for this book is not to be fatalistic, not to be pessimistic, but to try to remind us that we're facing serious, dangerous structural stress. That's the condition that we'll find the US and China in for as far as we can see. And the question is whether we can be inventive about ways to escape Thucydides' trap. I'm hopeful, but I'm especially looking forward to hearing more from others about how to escape Thucydides' trap. So thank you.